Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sew Together Live with Shannon Fabrics. My name is Sheila Ryan, and I'm a Cuddle ambassador for Shannon Fabrics based in Texas. And with me is Dawn Chace, who's also a Cuddle ambassador, and she's based in Virginia. So Shannon Fabrics is actually in California. So we're coming to you from all across the country. So if you're here in the live stream with us, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, be sure to say hi in the chat. We have other Cuddle ambassadors, Lisa Luke in the Facebook chat, and then Jackie Hillman in the YouTube chat. And they are helping us by noticing your comments, letting us know when you have a question. And that's what we're here to do today. We're here to answer questions specifically about machine embroidery and Cuddle fabric. So usually on Sew Together Live, we've got a project that we are working through, but machine embroidery is a huge topic. I mean, we're going to try to condense this down into 1 hour, but if you know Dawn and me personally, you know that we could talk about machine embroidery and Cuddle fabric together for many, many hours. In fact, we've been doing that a lot for the last couple of years. Dawn's a good friend, and we have a lot of fun together. So we're actually really excited, though, to kind of do a deep dive, a speed run through all of the things that you might need to know to get started with machine embroidery and Cuddle fabric, and all of the tools we love using for machine embroidery and sewing. And it's a lot. We've got a lot to share with you today, but we're going to be sharing some projects that we've made. We've got, we're going to refer to the Shannon Fabrics machine embroidery on Cuddle tip sheet. So we're going to have links for all of those things for you. But we want to remind you first that would you please share this out to your social medias, share it out to your personal pages, whether you're on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you are on social media. Just let other people know, because these are questions that we get asked all the time. And so we're hoping that this session will be really informative for people that are wanting to learn about getting really good results on Cuddle fabric with their embroidery machines. Okay, that's a lot. So Dawn, do you want to say hi and tell us a little bit about how long you've been doing machine embroidery and how you like using Cuddle fabric with it?
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to say I'm so honored and grateful to be here with all of you today. I am so excited to share my love of Cuddle and my love of machine embroidery with you. And as Sheila mentioned, her and I are very dear friends. We can talk machine embroidery, like she said, for days. Actually, there was one day a couple of weeks ago that we were on talking from about 9 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. So fortunately, the children are old enough to feed themselves, so everything was taken care of really well. So anyway, my name is Dawn Chace. I'm the founder, owner, designer, digitizer at Creative Appliques. My business has been in existence for 11 years now. I celebrated my 11-year anniversary. I create applique designs, embroidery fonts, applique fonts, regular embroidery designs, and in the hoop projects, which all lend themselves very nicely to machine embroidery. I also create designs for AccuQuilt dies. So if you have an AccuQuilt, some designs I have appliques and now in the hoop project, which I'm so excited about, that are coming out now. We'll show you 2 of them today. So that's in the hoop projects that are used with the AccuQuilt die. So not a way for you to be able to use your AccuQuilt die, not just for an applique design, not just for paper crafts or, any other kind of decoration kind of thing, but as an full up in the hoop project. So that's super exciting. I've been a Cuddle ambassador for over 3 years now, and it's just amazing. I absolutely love the Cuddle. Everybody in the house fights over the Cuddle blankets. Everybody has their own blanket, but still wants everybody else's. So it's a whole thing. So anyway, we absolutely love Shannon Fabrics and are very excited to be here with you today.
Awesome. That's so great. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned AccuQuilt, because we're going to show off a little bit of machine embroidery, AccuQuilt plus Cuddle. So we're just throwing all of the things in there. But AccuQuilt's been a super great partner with Shannon Fabrics. And I'm thrilled that you got some machine embroidery designs out of it, because my we'll talk a little bit more about this, but my sewing machine applique skills are less than great, because my default is to put anything that I can underneath my machine embroidery or my embroidery machine, because it's precise, it does what you want it to do, and there's a lot less room for error. So it's a lot less of me, and I've got the computer telling the thing what to do. And so with the AccuQuilt dies and the die cuts, your room for error is a lot minimized. That's not a really good way to word that, but it's a lot easier. It's a really clean effect, and it was fast. So this morning I was running some other samples, and I used the AccuQuilt die, cut out the pieces, put it on the embroidery machine, loaded Dawn's files, added a font, and I was done in 20 minutes. So yeah, it really does make things a lot simpler. We'll talk more about the AccuQuilt thing though, but thank you, everybody. I see people in the comments saying that they're sharing. So thank you all so much. Thanks for being here with us. And thanks for sharing it too. So sharing is really important, because we have prizes to give away. So we're going to give away not only some Cuddle, which is lovely, and that's a huge thing too, but we're also giving away a gift certificate or a gift code for each of our websites. So Dawn, you have your own website, like you mentioned, Creative Appliques, and you've got beautiful embroidery designs. And because you know Cuddle, you have lots of designs that work for Cuddle fabric. I also have a embroidery design website. So I'm a digitizer also. A digitizer is someone who makes the machine embroidery designs. It's a special kind of crazy, because you got to like the computer stuff. And we'll talk a little bit more about digitizing things that we put into designs to make sure that when you sew them with Cuddle, they work well. There's some things to look for. Yeah, I've got mine too. Mine is designsbybabymoon.com. And I love stitching with Cuddle, machine embroidery, making all kinds of things with machine embroidery. In fact, I just got to say, I made my earrings out of Cuddle. So if you wonder, can Cuddle do that? Yes, Cuddle can do that. So let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is some of the tools that you use for machine embroidery are kind of the same tools that we use when we talk about sewing with a regular sewing machine with our Cuddle. So your Olfa blade, we're going to use those same techniques to kind of prep our fabrics that we've learned from doing regular sewing projects with Cuddle. But machine embroidery comes with, I want to say, a few more accessories, but it's really kind of a never-ending deep dive into all of the things that you could acquire to use with machine embroidery. But an embroidery machine is different than a sewing machine in that it is a computerized XY grid thing. So basically, digitizers like Dawn and I make little programs called design files that you send them to your embroidery machine, and the embroidery machine stitches that pattern onto fabric for you. So you could do a lot of the things that embroidery machines do with your sewing machine, but you're doing a lot of manual work. So an embroidery machine kind of takes the labor out of that. It puts it all on the back end. So we do all the labor for you in building a design file, writing instructions, and then the embroidery machine does a lot of the work. Now, it's not completely hands-off, because if you have an embroidery machine, they can be temperamental, and you don't really want to turn your back and let them do their own thing. You want to stay there with them. And when we're talking about embroidery projects that are completely done on the machine, there's some handwork. Sometimes there's quite a bit of handwork, but with Cuddle, we're going to use some different kind of stabilizers. We're going to use toppers. If we're doing it in the hoop project, we might be working on the back or the front of the hoop equally as much. We might be using zippers and hardware and all kinds of things in our project just to it's kind of like having a mini little factory at our fingertips. So yeah, there's all kinds of things we can do, but the embroidery machine is just a really amazing thing. And we're not necessarily trying to like, we're not selling embroidery machines, but if you don't have one, you should get one because they're fun and it's fun to have fun. So with the Cuddle fabric, though, we use some special kind of scissors, and I had mine close by, but we use applique scissors. And so applique scissors are kind of different than regular sewing scissors because they're curved and they dip in because we're going to work on the hoop while we have the fabric on the machine. So we need applique scissors. We need those special tools like that. We need little thread snips, and maybe you don't want to get your big old scissors, but you want some tiny, tiny snips. And when you have tiny snips like that, those tiny snips can help you also trim applique. And when you're working with Cuddle, sometimes a tiny point is better than a big chunky thing because we don't want to cut the fibers necessarily. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. I see Mary Stevens said they convinced you. I know we've been working on you for a long time, Mary, to get you into the embroidery world. So yay, more fun, more things to do. Also, with machine embroidery, we can use things like magnets and different kinds of pins and tapes and adhesives that you may have seen at your quilt store, but maybe you didn't necessarily know. So, Dawn, do you want to show us some of those notions, if you don't mind, and tell us a little bit about your favorite kind of machine embroidery tools or notions or those products that we love using?
Okay, so some of the ones that I like are the Kai scissors when you need to get into a really tight area and get really close to the stitching. Those are great. Also, double curve applique scissors are awesome. These help you get up and over the hoop of the embroidery hoop to get in there nice and close into the stitching. We also like duckbill. Now, these are tiny duckbills, but they also have ones that are about 6 inches, and these are great as well to help get super, super close to the stitching and allow for the fabric or the Cuddle to be cut close to the stitching without cutting the stitching. So these are awesome. Let's see, what else do we like? I like using sometimes the Sew Tight magnets that are great to use instead of pins. And I know a lot of people are concerned about using magnets next to their embroidery machines because they've heard that you should never have magnets next to them. Well, the fact is, embroidery machines have come a long, long way over the years. And so getting magnets near your embroidery machine, it's not a problem. The strength of these magnets are not going to damage the insides or the operating parts of the machine. Something else I love to use too is a magnetic hoop. So these magnetic hoops are from Designs in Machine Embroidery, and they're great because there's no recessed part on these. They make these for all, just about every single needle machine. You know, you can find out on their website. Then there's links to products in the blog post to some of these products we're talking about, specifically these hoops. So anyway, they have no recessed part. So it's great because it, you know, just essentially sandwiches your stabilizer and your Cuddle in one place. So some other things that we really like too are, this is medical tape, and it's actually called Transport. So it's super clear, but it sticks very well. It holds the Cuddle to the stabilizer really well, but it also tears very easily too. And so when you're stitching something down like a zipper for an in the hoop bag or something like that, when you stitch over this, it has a nice clean tear to it. So it helps you be able to, you know, not rip out the stitching, but get all of the tape out of the way. The other thing that we really love too is another options instead of the magnets, if you don't love the magnets, are clover head pins. Now, why clover head? Well, because they have a really large head on them so that they're not going to get lost as easily in all of the loft and the fluff and the softness of the Cuddle. This is going to allow you to be able to find your pin when you are done with your project. One other thing I wanted to point out as well, and then I'll turn it back to Sheila so that she can, I see the question, I'll get to that in a second, that Sheila can share with us. The other thing that I always use, now when you're using Cuddle on a regular sewing machine, you want to use this 90-14 needle. With machine embroidery, it's a little bit different. You can use your 75-11 needle. I use the 75-11 needle all the time with my machine embroidery, and I don't have any issues. The only time you may encounter an issue is if you're stitching through something that's very thick, like maybe denim or canvas, some material that is super thick like that, that is going to need a tougher needle. But I always use a 75-11 needle. So the question was, what was the question? Which side of the duckbill scissors go against the applique when cutting? So Sheila, you may need to help me out here because these are right-handed and I'm left-handed. I think that the duckbill goes on top above the fabric. So let me grab a piece of fabric here really quickly and show you the way that they would be used. So imagine this is a shape here that I'm going to be cutting out. You would take the scissors and the duckbill would go on top. So the straight part of the scissor goes underneath, and that way it gets you super close to the stitching when you cut. What, Sheila, what do you think? Is that how you use them? Because I do know there's some, you know, it kind of goes out to some people. Some people say it should be the other way around. Some people don't even really use them either way, right? It like
Right.
the bill
Right.
on the bottom or the bill on the top. So that's like kind of like a controversial thing.
It
Unless
is.
you're talking to like a sewing a person who makes the scissors, you know. But
Right.
how do you use yours?
I actually, duckbills aren't my favorite. I have several pairs of them, and I don't feel like I get as close as other people can with the duckbill scissors. So I opt for the really skinny fine point Kai double curved applique scissors with the sharp point. There's a sharp point and a blunt point. Some people like the blunt point because they don't want to stab their stuff. And I like sharp pointy things. And so I like the pointy scissors, and I feel like I get closer that way.
Yeah.
I think it is one of those things that it's worth practicing with and see what you like better. We talk a lot when we do machine embroidery about practicing, try something on your scraps first. And if you're just getting started, you're like, well, where do I even get scraps? Well, make a larger Cuddle project, something that has pieces or something you've trimmed. And then there you go. You've got some scraps to practice with. So start with 4 yards of Cuddle, cut a little bit off the bottom of the colors, and now you've got some scraps to play with your embroidery machine. It's really all about practice and finding what you prefer using rather than there being one right answer for things. So Dawn and I are sharing what we have found best. And really, like, Dawn does different things than I do, and they both work well. So we're going to kind of share some collective wisdom, not just that we've come up with. I mean, we stand on the shoulders of others, and we've learned from some really great designers and really great embroiderers and software teachers how to do what we do, and there's always more to learn. So we are always in the process of learning and trying and experimenting. So somebody else asked a question about sending designs out for digitizing, and that was Helen. So that's a really great question, and we'll talk a little bit more about digitizing specifically a little bit later. But you definitely want to let whoever you send the embroidery, the design that you're asking for, you want to let them know that you need it for Minky. Shannon Fabrics brand of Minky is called Cuddle. So we talk Cuddle. We say Cuddle to mean Minky because we don't use much else than Cuddle Minky. I really won't even use anything else. But a digitizer will understand what you mean if you tell them you want it for Minky. Now, Shannon Fabrics has lots of different kinds of Minky. We've got the regular C3 Minky, which we talk about a lot. It's a really smooth, kind of flat. It's 3 millimeters thick, which is where the 3 comes from in the name. And it's very smooth. It's very tactile. It's lovely. It's very silky and lightweight. You can use it for all kinds of things. But there's longer pile cuddles with a long nap. So they're fluffy and fuzzy, and the nap can be 3 to 15, even longer. And by nap, I mean the fibers that stick up over the surface of the fabric. So there's a lot of fluff to deal with. We're going to talk about how to control the machine embroidery on the fluff or use it to enhance the fluff. So we're not trying to eliminate the fluffiness of Cuddle fabric at all with machine embroidery. We're just using those two things together to get the best result. Okay, and I see that Jackie says, yes, practice helps you feel comfortable with something when you're on your project, right? And all the time with machine embroidery, I'm a huge advocate of, don't stitch on the thing that's the permanent thing first. Do a test stitch, especially if you're newer to machine embroidery. And I've been doing machine embroidery for nearly, almost 10 years. And I do test stitches all the time, especially when I'm working with a new design. Dawn, I got some of your designs that you shared with me for this episode, the baby feet. And I did some test stitches before I went to the actual thing because I need to know how my machine works the way you've programmed it to. Okay. So we practice and we test before we do the final thing. Okay. That's a basic machine embroidery tip that goes for whether you're doing Cuddle or regular machine embroidery. But I love that you shared those tools. I'll add a couple of my favorites. When we're sewing with Cuddle fabric, we talk about using OD 505 temporary adhesive. So this is my favorite spray adhesive because it doesn't smell. It's, it kind of dissipates over time, so it doesn't stay sticky forever, but it's also kind of a pressure sensitive spray so that the more you press or pat it down, the stickier it is. And Odif recently has come out with a glue stick version of it. So if you're not a spraying person, especially for machine embroidery, this is really great. We don't want to necessarily spray around our embroidery machines. In some cases, they're really expensive. Like my kids have a newish car, but at one point the embroidery machine was more than the kids' car. So I don't want to get that all sticky. I want to take care of it. And so I would spray outside, then bring the thing I sprayed inside to use around the embroidery machine. But when the glue stick came out, I found that this actually saved me time. I didn't have to go outside. I could just put a little bit of the glue either on the stabilizer or on the applique pieces that I'm using for machine embroidery, and it's wonderful. It has the same kind of pressure sensitive characteristic, and so it works really well, and it doesn't gum up your needle. It doesn't smell. And unlike a regular like school glue or a not made for fabric kind of glue stick, it's made specifically for fabric, so it's not going to damage the fabric or the stabilizer. So yeah, these are great, and you can find them now at most quilt shops are carrying the Odif brand. So look for those; they're really great. Okay, so we've talked about tools. We've talked about.
I have another.
Oh yeah,
I can share actually. Actually, too, a chopstick to keep your fingers out from underneath the needles, because Cuddle can be really slippery. And so if you haven't used enough tape, you may need to, help guide your presser foot around the Cuddle. So you want to keep your fingers out of the way. So either a chopstick or a stiletto. So either one of those to help, keep the fabric where it's supposed to be if the machine is going really fast or whatever, but also to keep your fingers out of the way.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that because for people that aren't comfortable or haven't used a embroidery machine yet, they can go a lot faster than a regular sewing machine. With a sewing machine, you're in charge of the speed. And with an embroidery machine, generally you push the start button and it does it on its own. You're not really controlling much of the speed at all. It's doing the thing. And so, yeah, that's a really good idea. We do want to be safe, save our fingers. Don't put your fingers down there. Use the tools. We use the tools so that we can stay safe. Okay.
Yes.
But that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. We talked about the glue. We talked about we'll talk more about stabilizer in a minute, but let's look at some pretty stuff. Okay. So Dawn, you're going to show us some of the projects that you have created with machine embroidery on Cuddle. And then I'm going to show some projects also, but go ahead and share yours because I can't wait to see what you brought to show us.
Okay. So let's dive into a few samples here. So we were talking about the AccuQuilt. One of the AccuQuilt dies is a bib. So I created a file for the bib, and the file has 5 different type of quilting patterns. So essentially what happens is when you sew out the outline for the bib, then you'll put down some batting and then you'll put the Cuddle on top of it. And then you'll stitch out a quilting pattern. Now, because this is Cuddle, I didn't really use the batting because I didn't really need that extra density and the extra bulk in there. But you can see this is a stipple that I did. And there are 4 other patterns that come with the bib. So this is all done on your embroidery machine to include, if you wanted to do a second hooping, to include the outline stitching as well. So that's all done in the hoop. Another AccuQuilt design. These are actually 2 right here. This is the burp cloth. That is one of their dies. And so I did this as a machine embroidery design. You can't really see it, but there is vertical quilting lines here. So this design comes with, I think it's 5 or 6 different quilting patterns that comes with it. And this is all done in the hoop. Now, a note about this is this die, this design itself is 18.5 inches big. So you need to have a hoop or a machine that has a hoop that's 18.5 inches big. I'm going to get the design and I'm going to make it so it's a split design, but you will still need to have at least a 10 by 10 hoop so that you can stitch the 2 parts. So that takes a little bit longer of a process to do. So now this is the baby feet is part of their brand new baby medley that just came out last week, actually, February 4th, it came out. And the baby medley itself is a baby onesie, the baby foot, and then a baby bottle. When Sheila's showing you her stuff, I can grab the die if you guys want me to. But yeah, so this is the baby foot and this is all applique. So this is all luxe. I did this for both the foot and the burp cloth. So now I did a in the hoop zipper bag and so this is luxe here. And then for the letters, these are my double applique collegiate letters, the satin stitch with the bean stitch outline. And inside here is some C3. So there's that. And then I'll move on so Sheila can get to show you some stuff too. So here's the pillow I did with an embroidery font and applique letters. And I also did this was a fun one to create with yarn. This was all done on the embroidery machine. The yarn is the pumpkin, the orange and the green, and I just did that all on the embroidery machine. That's one of my embroidery designs. And then one last thing I'll show you quickly, and we can get Sheila in here, is edge-to-edge quilting on your embroidery machine. So it is a wonderful way when you use those magnetic snap hoops from Dime to be able to do edge-to-edge quilting along your entire quilt. So I don't know if you can see that very well. I've played with the lighting a lot to try to see. You can see it somewhat. The back is see-through, so it really shows up very nicely in person, but it's hard to see on the camera. But you can also see it here with some of the lucks. So, and that's just a basic running stitch. So that's the samples I have to show you right now. We can talk more about some processes in a moment. Sheila wants to come back and show us her beautiful samples.
That's awesome. I love seeing what you've made. And like, there is just no end to the things that we can create with embroidery machines. So I'm really excited. Let me show you what I've got in front of me. So I've got some other samples that I've done with machine embroidery. This is because Valentine's Day is coming up. This is a little embroidery design. So it's an applique design, which means that you take layers of other pieces of fabric. I've used C3 for my layers for my applique pieces. And then, so this is not all stitched except for, the letters are all stitched, but it's the outlines really that are stitched. And then some details that are added after you get those pieces of fabric on. So applique is super fun. And we'll talk more about that. But also I used Dawn's baby bib file. And I did put batting in mine because I wanted to make the quilting stand out because it's just so beautiful. This whole thing was done with the die cuts from my AccuQuilt. So I used the die, ran my C3 through it, had two pieces, a front and a back, and also the batting piece. I cut that too on the AccuQuilt. And then ran the outline stitch on my embroidery machine on poly mesh stabilizer. I like the poly mesh because it's a real light stabilizer and it helps keep the drape of the fabric. So the only stiffness is from the batting. You can see it has some stiffness, but it's from the batting. It's not because the thing itself is stiff because it has a real heavy batting. Or a stabilizer. It's not. It's just smooth and soft and yummy. And it's just gorgeous. The quilting really does stand out beautifully on the Cuddle. And talking about quilting, I have a sample of edge to edge quilting also. So I'll show you on the front. This is a bunch of puppy dogs. And while it's a print fabric, you can't really see the quilting until you look at the solid color on the back. And now you can really see the texture of the edge-to-edge quilting. And so it looks as though it's been long-armed, but it's not. I did it on the embroidery machine. And I used one of those magnetic hoops like Dawn was showing because I can simply put my embroidery design file in and it stitches out sections. And then that magnetic hoop just lets you scoot the fabric in the hoop till you get to the next section and you do another chunk. And so I can't see my sections right now because it's been a while since I did it, but I know that it took me maybe 6 or 8 hoopings. And this is a generous sized baby blanket sized little piece that I did. But so it didn't take long at all though, because those edge to edge embroidery designs for machine embroidery really only take like 2 or 3 minutes each. They're really, really nice. We'll talk more about the types of stitching, but I wanted to show you some other projects done with machine embroidery. So these are zipper bags. So this is a zipper bag that I've used a little bit of Mylar film instead of a topper in. And so I get like sparkle and it's still soft and cuddly because it's Cuddle. And then also this one, this one still looks great. I actually made this about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And I carry it. This is my earring bag that when I travel, it's got all my earrings in it. And so it still looks great. And it has been all over the place with me in my purse often a lot. So lots and lots of things that you can do. I wanted to show you some other projects though. So because Valentine's Day is coming up, I've got a little block that has love letters on it. And I did that a couple of different ways just to show you how the variety of textures that Cuddle fabric has. So let's get that heart right set up. So this one is all on C3. So smooth C3 on the back as well as the appliques. And this one is done with Luxe Cuddle on the back and then smooth C3 for the applique pieces. So there's a little bit more depth and dimension. You can kind of see the shadows from the Lux Cuddle standing up around the edges because it's, you know, the appliques are down in there. And there's things that we can do to make your applique stand out, you know, so you can see the stitching or not. There's lots of different techniques. This one is just an applique on Lux Cuddle. The applique fabric is C3. And then there's more applique fabric in the glasses of this llama. So lots of different styles of things. I haven't run out of things to do with machine embroidery and Cuddle fabric. And I'll show you this one, even though we've got some pieces to, I want to show you a little bit more about topper. So this is just a little baby, again, using those AccuQuilt dies, the baby medley, and the embroidery files that Dawn created to go with those. And then I added some lettering. I used my embroidery software to add lettering to this. And I've treated my lettering, and I wanted to show you a little bit more about how to take care of this topper situation. But I used a topper to help the lettering sit up nicely because I wanted to see these stitches. I didn't necessarily need to see the ones around the feet. They're there to make the applique stick to the fabric, but I do want to see the stitches that I put in as lettering. So some stitches you want to fade into the background and others you don't. People ask all the time, can I do embroidery on the thicker cuddles? Well, yes, you can. This is a piece of Encore, and the Encore Luxe Cuddle is really, it's one of my favorites because it's so yummy and dense, and it's got a really long pile, but it's so much fun to stitch with because you get some really great textural differences. And we're going to talk more about, you know, what this situation is right here. It's spoiler alert, it's called a knockdown stitch, or sometimes it's called a nap tack stitch or a lay down stitch, but it's a special kind of machine embroidery stitching that you can use to flatten the fibers just a little bit so that your embroidery lettering doesn't get lost in the fabrics. Does that make sense? Okay, I've got lots more that I want to show you, but let's talk a little bit about stitch types. So Dawn, you have a sample for us, and you have some stitch types of embroidery stitches, and you're going to show us kind of really how Cuddle behaves with these different kind of stitches.
Yeah, so I just took some C3. These are both C3, the lavender and the pink. And I purposefully did the stitching in a contrasting color so you can see it better. But one of the things about working with Cuddle and machine embroidery is the fact that you want to make sure, depending on what type of Cuddle you are stitching on, that you have the correct embroidery design. Now, if it's something that you don't want to see the edge of, you might want to choose a design that is like a running stitch. So this one here in the center top is a triple bean stitch, and you don't see it very much. You don't see the stitching very much. So if you want it just to like fade into the background, not be something that is seen, then that is an option to use as a way for that just to be buried. Now, if you want to have a little bit extra texture, you can choose something like the blanket stitch here. This one has, you know, it's a very similar stitching to something that you would find on your regular sewing machine. And, you know, it's pretty old school stitch that comes on a lot of machines. You can see I have some of my topper here. I used water soluble stabilizer on here on the top so that the stitches didn't sink in. So that's something that you want to do as well. This one here is a zigzag. It's a little bit of a tighter and a wider zigzag, but that is also something that it doesn't have the density of, you know, a satin stitching. So it's lighter in how much stitching that there actually is. So you can compare that to, this is the zigzag stitching, and this is the satin stitching, where that's a nice thick solid stitching that is very dense, but it gives a nice defined edge on it. And then I threw 2 more in here, just like a kite stitch here, or a double zigzag, and then a lace stitch for something that is super fancy. And I think that's turned out really beautiful. As a note though, if you're doing something like this on a thicker Cuddle, this is probably going to get buried and you're not really going to see it very well, as along with something like this. So if you wanted to do a nice decorative lace stitch like this and not have it get buried or lost in the Cuddle, you want to use like the C3. And so these are some examples of some stitch types that you can use depending on what you want to your effect. So I'll tell you this here, this pillow here, the fall, the letters are applique and they're done in a blanket stitch. So that's the blanket stitch right there. And that is the same color thread used as the C3. So it kind of fades in a little bit and you don't see it as much. There's the camera. Okay, and so then one more I wanted to show as far as, oh, yes. So I wanted to show you this one that has, the stitching I chose on this was a very fancy decorative lace stitch, not like this one, but a little bit different. And you can't see it at all. It's like completely buried in there, which is fine. But as you can see, you can't really see the structure of that. So that's a sample of, doing a test stitch to see how your finished edge of your applique is going to show up on your finished project. Now for me, I don't really care that I don't see it because I like the way the foot looks. It looks really cute. And the stitching is not staring at you in the face. So it makes it look for a very three-dimensional appearance without actually, having stitching standing out so much. So I didn't see if there are any questions, if anybody had any questions on any of that, but those are the samples I have to show. Sheila, do you have some other samples of things that you might want to, oh, one last one, sorry. So this one I forgot to show earlier, but so this is a countdown to Christmas hanging, and in here there's another decorative stitching. Now this is on chalk cloth, but you can kind of still see it on the Cuddle, and the red is C3 as well. So that's just some samples of different stitch types on the outline for the appliques.
Those are all
what you got to show us.
Those are all super awesome. And I really love the way you showed us the different types of stitching, because I think that's one of the things, like really when you're starting machine embroidery, to know that there are different types of stitches that your embroidery machine is going to do. It's going to do machine embroidery, but there's lots of different types of stitching and types of things that you're playing with in order to get the kind of textures you want. So here I've got some embroidery stitching that I've done. And this is a satin stitch font, which would be it would be fine on C3. On the Valentine's one that I showed you before, this is a satin stitch lettering font. Okay, this is all part of the design, so you don't have to put the font in. But I'm using font to mean the parts we read, the letters we read. Okay, but it's satin stitches, and a satin stitch has these wide, sometimes they're called a column stitch because it's wide chunks of embroidery. They kind of take a little bit, it takes a little bit of time to do that, though. It takes a lot of thread. For machine embroiderers, thread is our paint palette. Those are our colors. That's where we get a lot of the texture that when we do machine embroidery is from the thread. And so for this one, I really wanted that thread to stand out. So behind it, you can kind of see a little bit of a shadow, and that shadow is stitching that's actually the same color as the back of the background fabric, and it's called a knockdown stitch. So in some instances, we'll use a knockdown stitch to give the opportunity for our lettering to pop a little bit. Maybe your knockdown stitch, if you have embroidery software, you can get it so it's very close around the lettering, so it's not a full area. Or maybe if you have a different design. So these are little snowflakes that I did on Luxe Cuddle, and I wanted that snowflake to stand out. But you can see how thick and fluffy the fabric is. And if I had just done it in the Luxe by itself, you would not have been able to see that snowflake. It would have been buried in the fibers. So there's a very light knockdown stitch that's around each snowflake that allows the stitching to show up. And it kind of almost has a little shadow effect behind the snowflake. For this one, I used white thread because I didn't want to change my thread at the moment. But if I had, you can see the white thread in the shadow behind it. But because a knockdown stitch is not a very dense, so it's not a solid fill of stitches, it's just kind of a back and forth, kind of a sketchy stitch. Sometimes there's one layer of it. Sometimes there's two that really hold down the texture. But it'll give the opportunity for the embroidery that you want to see to really show up a lot better. The other thing that I use, and we mentioned it a little bit a while ago, is the topper, using a topper so that you can see the satin stitching a little bit better. And in this example, I think you can see it really well. So I started out doing the lettering with the embroidery machine with no topper on it. So this says 10 tiny toes. If you're not a cursive reader, my kids would not be able to read this. My little ones anyway. But 10 tiny toes, and 10 is done just, I just let the embroidery machine just do its thing. Then I stopped and I added some toppers so that we could see the difference in the lettering. So the topper that I'm using is actually a heat away topper. There's different kinds of toppers. There's wash away toppers. This one's a heat away topper. This one happens to be by Sulky. And I use this pretty much exclusively for machine embroidery as my preferred topper. It's a filmy plastic, so you can see the shine of it on here, but it really feels a lot like plastic wrap or those really thin food safe bags, the ones that you use in the kitchen. It's not, though. It's specially made for machine embroidery. And what it does is it stays behind the stitching, kind of as a barrier between the stitching and the fabric, and holds those stitches up. So a wash away topper is going to wash away when the thing is thrown in the wash because it dissolves in water. The heat away topper is not going to wash away. And that's why I like it, because when I peel it off, I'm peeling off, the pieces of the plastic topper that are kind of exposed, but the topper film that is underneath the stitching will stay in there forever. Okay. So unless I heat it, and you really have to heat it pretty well. You have to heat it more than I'm comfortable heating Cuddle fabric with. So I don't heat it away. I just peel it away. But you can already see the difference in the quality of the stitching from 10 to tiny toes. This is so much nicer. Now I've got some, topper to pick out. And this is one of those, with machine embroidery, we kind of have like we get to do some handwork, and sometimes it's really kind of therapeutic. We get to pick at things and make them all perfect. But anyway, it's going to hold those stitches up on top of the fabric a lot better. So I did not use a knockdown stitch behind it in my software. I simply put the lettering in. And so if you buy an embroidery design and you don't have software yet, or it didn't come with a knockdown stitch built in, you can use a topper to help your satin stitch lettering stand out a little bit better. Alice asks, if you don't have an AccuQuilt, is there another way to cut out the forms? You know what? Actually, if you have an embroidery machine and you don't have an AccuQuilt, you definitely can use the embroidery designs, especially like the ones that Dawn's created, because they have a placement stitch. What you would need to do, though, is run that placement stitch twice so that the second run of it becomes a tack down stitch to hold down your bigger piece of fabric. And after that second stitch, then you would trim around it just like a regular applique. And once you got it completely trimmed, then you'll run the next stitch. So you got to think through the process a little bit if you're going to do applique with an AccuQuilt built design and not use the AccuQuilt cutter to have a pre-cut applique. Does that make sense? Let me know if that doesn't make sense. But yes, you totally can. Most applique designs, if you're not using pre-cuts, they'll come like that. They'll come with a placement stitch that kind of draws an area for you to put the applique down. Then you'll put your fabric down on top of it. It'll tack that applique down, and then you'll do some trimming. You'll either trim around it on the outside or the inside of the line, and then it'll run a finishing stitch. So a regular applique is usually three steps. An AccuQuilt applique doesn't need the second step because the trimming has already been done. So it really is a fast and easy process. But on this one, so I've got those satin stitches in the lettering, but I chose the blanket stitch version of the applique so that these feet just look really soft, and the stitching kind of it's not the star of the show. The feet are the star of the show, not necessarily the stitching. And then 10 tiny toes, or at least tiny toes, part of it stands out really well. I would redo this. So we're going to call this practice because I would like this part to stand out as much as this. Even though C3 is not a super long fiber, this does fall into the stitching a little bit more than I like personally. People that don't do machine embroidery will not know. So there's always that to consider. So I think machine embroiderers, we tend to get hard on ourselves. We're like, oh, it's not perfect. Well, if we go to the any store that sells things that are pre-embroidered, you'll feel really good about the quality of embroidery that you can get done yourself. So I just want to assure you of that. But it is a great process. So on this one, I've got 3 different kinds of those stitching as well. I have a satin stitch on this star, a blanket stitch on this one, and then just a regular zigzag stitch on the tiny one. And the differences are not very dramatic. These 2 definitely took a lot less time to stitch than the satin stitch one. I used a lot less thread and I was done very, very quickly. So that's another thing to consider when you're looking at machine embroidery designs. The other thing that I wanted to say is that, like Dawn said, when you're looking at the way the embroidery is done in the design file, really look at that design because it is going to make a difference in how it comes out. We say to, practice, make yourself some samples and then keep them around. Don't just pitch them because those samples can really teach you something. So I can see that if I wanted a satin stitched, if I really wanted my thread to show and I wanted people to know this is machine embroidery, this is the real deal, or, some people really love that satin stitch bold look. I want to get done. And so I'll choose a blanket stitch, which is what this is, to have a very quick but great effect for my machine embroidery applique. This 10 tiny toes and these sweet dreams, 10 tiny toes took 15 minutes to stitch. Okay. But this, these letters like this will be done in like 2 minutes. So it's first of all, it's a matter of how much time you have. And then also, the effect that you're trying to get as well. I see lots of people commenting here, and I'm so glad that y'all are here. While I'm talking to you face to face, let me remind you to keep sharing if you haven't already, but share because we're collecting those names to be entered at the end for prizes, Cuddle, as well as gift certificates for Designs by Baby Moon and Creative Appliques. And while I'm saying that, let me remind you that over on the blog post, Dawn and I both have a special on our websites that if you aren't the winner, we hope you are, but if you aren't and you'd like to pick up some of these designs, you can use code Cuddle for 10% off both of our websites until the end of February. So this is February 2025. So till the end of the month, the code Cuddle works for both Designs by Baby Moon and for Creative Appliques. Okay, I see some more people are sharing, so thank y'all for sharing. Okay, so we've talked about stitch types. We've talked about how to make your stitches be raised up a little bit more over the fabric. Do you want to see some? I told you we were going to show you the mistakes. Let me show you a couple of mistakes, all right? And Dawn may not have as many as I have, but I used to throw away my mistakes because I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to be reminded of that, but sometimes I need to keep them around so that I keep learning. So on this design, this was a test for a project that we did these last year. There's a Sew Together live with this, a Sew Together Saturday workshop is what we did. But this design file, it was a whole series of these bees and the bee lettering in applique on Cuddle with some satin stitch. So we got to see and learn a whole bunch of things together. We learned about the blanket stitches. We learned about how the satin stitches can stand up with a topper and all of those things. But as I was making my samples, I did not put a topper everywhere I should have. And would you look at this fill stitch? This is a filled embroidery area, and you can see the Cuddle fabric coming through my embroidery. Now, by the time I got to this part, I had gotten done with a lot of the other stitching. So red was kind of at the end. And if you've spent all this time being really careful to do everything else, and then you've taken your topper off or you haven't put it back down, and you've got more embroidery to do, you might end up with an area where this is kind of a learning lesson. And I don't want to do this ever again. And so I tend to err on the side of using more topper maybe than I need to. And I will, because I don't want to see this again. I don't want to have gotten through all this work and then have something like this happen. So my Cuddle is showing through. If I had used a topper underneath there, that wouldn't have happened. So that's just one of the oops things. The other thing that's kind of an oops, and it's not terrible, but it's not, it's not my favorite, is I have these little, I was just playing with running stitches. Okay, so let's turn this right side up. This is a little running stitch kind of on C3. Okay, and it's, if you can't tell, it's just like a bulldog face. So the kind of stitching is a bean stitch, and I was trying to make it kind of thick and bold, knowing that you really can't see that on Cuddle fabric, but I still did it anyway. But what I didn't do, and this is the part where we're going to transition into our next kind of topic, is when I was picking my stabilizer, I picked one that was too, it was too heavy. This is a poly mesh stabilizer, but it's fusible. And this particular brand is really kind of sturdy and stable on its own. And so when I think about doing something on Cuddle, I want to keep it soft. And if I use a stabilizer that is this thick and dense, it doesn't drape the way I want it to. So when I'm doing a Cuddle project, I want it to be soft and I want it to be squishy and keep the softness of the fabric. Just because I put embroidery on it doesn't mean that I want it to be like a shield. I still want it to be soft and snuggly. So I need to think about the kind of stabilizer that I used. And I used a lighter poly mesh stabilizer on these, on everything else since then, because I know how this works and I like the effect of it better than the other poly mesh. Okay, I see Winona asks, how do I look at a design file on the websites and know if it has a knockdown stitch or a bean stitch? That is a really, really great question. So most of the time, an embroidery design is going to say, it's going to have a little description about it. And so it should say, if this is full of satin, if it has a topper, then it will, or a knockdown stitch built into the design, I'm pretty sure that it will tell you that. So I know a lot of designs that come with a knockdown stitch built in will tell you that, let me switch back so I can talk to you. You're not just looking at my table. But it'll tell you this has a version with and without a knockdown so that you get both ways. And so also, the designer may tell you specifically, like if you're part of their Facebook group, as they're building designs, we love to talk about machine embroidery. So generally we make Facebook groups so we can talk just about machine embroidery with people that are our people. And so I know as I'm building designs, often I'm having a lot of conversations with people about how it works. And there may be a tutorial where this information is shared. Dawn, how do you let people know if your design is specifically done for, what a special stabilizer or in stitches?
It'll be in the comments, or it will also like in the product description, or it will also include like a PDF form document inside the main folder that will tell them how to deal with it. But to be honest, I don't have any designs that have knockdowns that come behind them. I'm not, that's usually specifically digitized for a specific project. But what I do have is I have shapes on my website. So I have two different ones. I have shapes that it's a knockdown, nap down, loft down, however verbiage you want to call it. But there are ones that don't have a satin stitch around it, and then there's ones that do have a satin stitch around it. So I just have a whole bunch of shapes that for purchase, instead of trying to put a knockdown behind a certain design, because to put a knockdown behind a certain design, you're specifically digitizing it for a specific fabric. And so the majority of my designs all are for any type of project that you'll be doing. But so for example, Sheila showed you some knockdowns of some stuff. Well, here's another. This is just a circle frame, like from on my website. And this one is done without the satin stitch. So all this is behind the name is all it is a stitching. So what's the difference on that stitching is the fact that it's not super dense. So even though, and I did it on purpose, really big around the name, so you can see how much of an effect it has on the actual font here standing up. Now this is a decent size font, kind of chunky, kind of thick, but not super thick, that if I just stitched it in this loft here of the Luxe, that it would get buried and it would get lost. So putting a knockdown behind it, and this is, like I said, the thinner density one, you can still see the fabric behind it. I used a matching thread to the Luxe here, the turquoise, so that it would blend in and you wouldn't notice it so much. Now, of course, you can notice it because I made it so large, but had I made it, an oval and something smaller that was closer to the size of the word, the name, then you wouldn't see it as much. But the purpose of using a knockdown like this is to hold those fibers down to get the design that you want to stand out. And so similar to, when you do the edge-to-edge quilting on something like this is just a running stitch. You can still see it here in the Luxe. You can still see it, but it's not as bold and doesn't stand out as much as like when you see it on the bib here. Okay. So, and with this bib, I didn't even use a knockdown behind this font. This font is nice and thick, so I didn't need to use a knockdown on this. However, if I was stitching this font or an embroidery font like that on something like this Luxe here, I would definitely be using a knockdown on this. The other option is if you have something that's super lofty, long fibers, you can do, as we showed before, you can do an applique patch, and you can stitch the name on the C3 or whatever, or regular, fabric, whatever you wanted to use. And then you can attach the patch onto the blanket or the item, so that, if you have something that's super long fibers, that's another way to be able to add a design, an applique, a name, something like that onto the item. So yeah, we're talking about oopsies. So one oopsie that, I have here is, well, I talked about a little bit before, was this, AccuQuilt design here, the foot. I used a super thin, super small, the decorative outline on this, and you can't see it. So is that an oopsie? I don't know. It may be an oopsie if I really wanted to see what that stitching was, but if I just wanted to hide it and bury it, then it's all good, right? Another oopsie here is with this one. So this design, some parts of this font are kind of thin. So they kind of get a little bit lost in the C3. So that's another thing to consider too when you're looking at designs on what to stitch on something. The C3 with this font may not have been, you know, a good choice. I should have probably put a knockdown behind this lettering for it to stand out a little bit better.
I love that, Dawn, and I really do love that you have some oopsies that you could share with us as well. So not that it's kind of like a misery loves company thing, but we keep our oopsies so we can learn from them, and right, and we have things that those oopsies can kind of teach us. So I see Jackie asked what kind of stabilizer you used behind your knockdown. Do you want to let us know?
Well, so since this was just, you know, on a scrap here, it's cutaway. I hooped cutaway, and then I did a basting box around this. So that's another way. Yeah, one of the I think we'll need to talk about too is how to prevent the cuddle from pulling in on itself. And so doing a basting box around something really helps. But the stabilizer that I did use in the hoop here was a medium cutaway. But depending on the project I'm doing, I will either use mesh or I will use a medium cutaway. Always a cutaway, never a tearaway, because Cuddle has a stretch to it. And you know, there's the whole thing in machine embroidery where is if you can wear it, don't tear it. Well, that's not always the case, because this is something that, you know, you'd be maybe making clothes out of this and want to embroider someone's name on a cute little jacket or a shawl. If you're in the I Love Cuddle group on Facebook, that you'll see some amazing clothing that people make using Cuddle, and you may want to embroider some flowers or something, you know, decorative on it. And you know, you want to make sure that even though you will be wearing that item, you should not be using tearaway stabilizer. Cutaway stabilizer, it needs to have that extra bit of structure. There's something else you can use too. There's two other things you can use as well. If you're stitching a design onto Cuddle, is where did I just grab it? SF 101. Here we go. So SF 101 is something that you can iron onto the back of an item so that it gives structure and support to the Cuddle, and so you won't get that, you know, the pulling in on it and the machine embroidery causing it to collapse on itself. It also, if you're doing an applique, another thing you can do as well, if it's like old school applique. So what is old school applique? Well, like we were talking about before, if you're not using an AccuQuilt die or an AccuQuilt shape, what you would do is stitch the first run, and that would be the placement line, and then place your fabric down, and then stitch the second run, which is the tack down, and then you would trim it. So that's what we call old school applique, where you're not pre-cutting the fabric either on a cutting machine or AccuQuilt. You're cutting it by hand right there in the hoop at the time. Is you could also use some Heat and Bond light, the light stuff, not regular Heat and Bond. You want Heat and Bond light. You want the purple stuff, because the other stuff is really not supposed to be used for sewing through that item. So you would iron this onto the back. You just follow the manufacturer's instructions, but you just iron this onto the back of the item that you're using as an applique. And then when it cools, remove the paper, and then you can iron it onto the place where you're placing the fabric after you've trimmed it, after you trim the fabric. But we also use this a lot too when you are using the AccuQuilt shapes. So what you would, you know, take the Heat and Bond light, iron it to the back of the Cuddle, send the fabric with the paper still attached on the die through the AccuQuilt machine. After it's cut the shape, remove the paper, and then when you stitch the placement line, and then you place the pieces down, and you can go ahead and use a small iron and really softly and gently just get that little heat to activate the Heat and Bond light onto the item that you're stitching on. I saw the question, it went away. Or I guess it was a comment. You can use the SF-101 to iron on the back of your t-shirts when making t-shirt quilts as well. Yes, Susan, thank you for that. Absolutely. That's something that also helps when making, t-shirt quilts. So Sheila, I turn it back to you for...
That's awesome. That was so, I mean, I feel like we were just throwing so much information.
And we're not done yet.
We're not done yet. The other thing that I wanted to say is some people do use that topper film, either the heat away or the wash away topper, underneath their knockdown stitches. And I don't.
I did.
Do you use a topper underneath the knockdowns?
I did not, and I can, if you, I'll show you why I do it.
Yeah,
because here I'll show you why I do it. So when I stitched this one, right? So with some of the Cuddle, it's directionless, meaning, okay, we didn't even get into the whole nap thing yet, and we're not talking about taking a nap. We're talking about the nap of the Cuddle and stuff. So we haven't gotten there yet. But so this one, for example, this Luxe doesn't really have a direction, right? You can kind of feel like where it lays down nicely, but there's other places where it's like, well, I don't know if this is really directional. It's kind of it kind of is up to you on some of these. With the C3, there is definitely a direction and you can feel it. So that's one of the things too about Cuddle. You end up petting it a lot. Anyway, so you want to make sure that you have it in the correct direction you want for your project. So with C3, it's very clear what direction the nap is going. So one of the reasons why I will use the light, and I like the wash away stuff. It's easier for me to tear and just a little bit of water on it and it comes right off. But when I use this, what I will do is I don't want my fibers to be all like this and then put this down. Okay, so what essentially I am doing is I flatten out the nap of the item first, and then I put this down. Reason being is sometimes if you do not do that, and this one I did do a little bit in a hurry, and I wasn't so careful in flattening this out before I put the topper on and then sewed the nap down circle here. I don't know if you can see this, but there are some lines in here where it's not a design issue. It's where some of the little fibers were in line with and kind of poked up through this stitching. So it's kind of hard to see, but I'm talking about this area right here. There's a little bit of a line that you can see, and that's the lines of the Cuddle poking up through. So that's why I do use a topper underneath when I'm stitching the nap down, because I want to make sure that nap is all in the direction I want, and I want it to be held there so that the presser foot isn't snow plowing the whole time while it's trying to stitch this down, because then you would see a lot more of these excuse me, a lot more of these edges poking through on this here.
That's really awesome. Let me show you. Okay, so you showed us that way. Let me, I'm not going to disagree with you, okay, because you've been doing this longer than I have. But
disagree. We all have our experiences. You are welcome to disagree.
But
I am not the embroidery police.
I know, and I'm really thankful in our community. We don't do that to each other. Like, we don't gatekeep. We don't hide the secrets. Like, we'll tell you everything. But on my sample that I've got here, if we can switch, let's see, Adriana, can you switch from Dawn to me? And I'm just holding this up. So when you use a topper underneath a knockdown stitch, you can see the topper a little bit. So can you see the shine when I'm trying to get this to reflect on the light? Do you see the shine underneath those knockdown stitches under there? that shine, that's going to stay there. That topper is going to stay in the project unless you wash it. And you can wash your wash away topper out. I personally have texture issues, and I don't like wet polyester, and I don't like wash away stabilizer. I use wash away stabilizer all the time, but I do not like touching it. It grosses me out completely. And so I will avoid using a topper underneath my knockdown stitch. And what I will do instead is I will use what's called a bidirectional knockdown stitch. So bi means two. And what that is a knockdown stitch that has two layers. Essentially, it goes up one, it fills the shape with the knockdown stitching. So the back and forth and back and forth. And then it changes direction and it fills the opposite way. So if it missed any of those fibers peeking through the background of the knockdown stitching on the first pass, usually on the second pass, it'll catch it. And so that's what this one is. It's a knockdown that's going both ways across. It comes up one way and then it switches directions and comes up again. So it fills it twice. It's still nice and light. It's not stiff, but it is, it flattens it down just a little bit more. Now, how do you get a bidirectional knockdown stitch? Well, that's a whole other can of worms. But if the knockdown file is not already a bidirectional file, then you need something called embroidery software. Again, that's a whole, we could talk for hours just about that. And we don't have time for that today. We could talk more about it in the I Love Cuddle group if y'all would like to. In fact, I could even show you how to build a bidirectional knockdown stitch in Embrilliant software, which is what I use. But usually in the embroidery softwares, when you're generating a knockdown stitch or you're building it, you're making the shape manually by making a shape and then filling it with a light density fill stitch. Okay, that's what it would be called. Then you would simply duplicate that shape, and then if you set the angle of the stitches one way, you duplicate it, and on the second way you would put the other layer perpendicular right to that one, and that way you're going to hold those fibers down. But you could use a topper too. So if you're going to use the heat away topper, it's going to stay in there forever unless you heat it up. And I'm not that good, and I have melted my share of Cuddle with using heat, so I'm not going to do that anymore. And I also am not going to use wash away topper under it because I get grossed out too easily. So,
well, but that's where you need a Teflon sheet.
Yeah, I'm not touching it.
No, for the heat away.
Yeah, there's more than one way to skin the cat. So
yes,
I would rather spend hours on the back end in my software before I get to the embroidery machine and then have to make different choices. That's how.
So there's that.
Yeah. So, pick your fiddly, right? So somebody else said, yeah, Hatch is another embroidery software where you can use to put these kind of stitches together. Another thing that you can do with embroidery software, if you're building a design and you're putting your own lettering in, so say you're writing somebody's name, like Dawn showed us with the name Abby, something you can do with a file that is a satin stitch or has satin columns in it is you can increase what we call the pull compensation. So pull compensation is a fancy embroidery digitizer word that basically means that we can make those satin stitches fatter and chunkier so that they stand out better on Cuddle fabric. You can't do that necessarily with your embroidery machine, although some of the newer embroidery machines do have some of those file adjustment functions in it. It's a lot simpler to do it in software if you already have it, and you could look up how to increase the pull compensation. Getting nice wide satin stitches is going to help your lettering on Cuddle fabric stand out. That's something that I tell people all the time. It's really important to think about, how do you want this to look at the end? Cuddle fabric's special and it is worth using for your embroidery, but you do need to think about, how much do you want to see at the end, or what texture do you want it to be like at the end? And so thinking about your project at the very end and then backing up and seeing what steps you need to take to get there is it's really kind of a different tack than we do when we're just doing a sewing project. With the sewing project, we've got a pattern, we've got our fabric, and we can go. With machine embroidery, we've got the added thing of what did the digitizer intend this file to be used for in the first place? Can you use it on anything? Most likely, yes. I mean, most stock designs are able to be stitched on most things, but sometimes you get a design that has, a little bit less underlay, maybe it's a little bit lighter, and it doesn't work the way you think it should have worked. And so you need to really think through the whole process and think about how is this design intended to work. If you're building your own designs and say you've got digitizing software, whether using Embrilliant, Stitch Artist, or Wilcom, or even Hatch, or some of the other, Floriani's is another one, that have digitizing capabilities in them, then for Cuddle fabrics, you're going to want to add a little bit of extra underlay. You're going to want to start with those wider satin stitches. If you're building the file, you don't need to worry about adjusting the pull compensation because you can just make the satin stitches wider from the start. Okay, so that's something that you have a lot of control over when you have your own digitizing software. And digitizing software isn't just for professional digitizers. Lots of people get digitizing software because they want that kind of control. They want to be able to, they have a thing in mind, and the only way they can get that thing out of their embroidery machine is to digitize it themselves. And so it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. And I'm not ever going to talk anybody out of getting digitizing software, but there definitely is a learning curve to it. So you don't need that first when you start out doing machine embroidery. That's for later. But if you have questions, talking to somebody like Dawn or me or some of the other, there's a lot of digitizers in the I Love Cuddle group. We can help you, point you in the right direction there. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? We talked about stabilize. Oh, one more thing about stabilizer and thinking about the end project. And Adriana, you can put Dawn on the screen because we can kind of talk about this together for just a few minutes. Is when we're thinking about the stabilizers, and I'm talking about underneath the fabric. So in the hoop that we're using, did you already show us what happens when you try to hoop Cuddle fabric in a traditional embroidery hoop?
No,
Dawn?
not yet. Yeah, that was the next thing, was going into like how to hoop a project.
Okay. Show us that really quickly because we've talked a lot about the stabilizers, but we haven't really shown people how to use the Cuddle on their embroidery machine in the hoop, and we want to do that. So tell us what you got.
All right. So for this Cuddle, I hooped it in your traditional standard embroidery hoop. And this is just C3, so it's not something with a super duper amount of loft on it. And if you're new to embroidery, you might not know this. If you've been around the embroidery world for a while, see what happens to this? Adriana, can I go on full screen, please? Thank you. This is what we call the dreaded hoop burn. You can see the outline of the hoop here. With some items, this may never come out. If it's hooped too long, too much, too hard, the screws tighten down. However, you don't want to loosen the screws and you don't want to have it floppy in the hoop. So this is, something that it's got hoop burn on it, and I'm not going to be able to get that out no matter how much petting I do of it or how much, I try to. Ironing isn't going to work. It's just going to seal this in here even worse. And sometimes putting water on it may work, may not work. So one of the things that helps with Cuddle as hooping is we've talked about the magnetic hoop. And so depending on, what type of stabilizer you use, and we talked already about needing to have using the cutaway. So here's cutaway. Hang on, let me grab this other piece that fell, and it's not all hoop burned like the other one is. So lay the stabilizer down first, and then put the top down on the magnetic hoop. If you have a magnetic hoop, even if you're on a regular hoop, this is still going to be the same, right? So you want to still make sure that the stabilizer is nice and taut. You can play your favorite song on it. I don't know if you can hear that. So it's nice and taut. And now you can do, as Sheila mentioned, you can use the 505 spray on this away from your embroidery machine. You can use a glue stick on it, something that will help hold it down. And then you will lay your Cuddle down on the frame. So with this, how is it going to stay there? So you did the glue stick, or you did the spray, or you don't like either of those, you can use the magnets help. So because this frame here, the top part is magnetic, I could just put these magnets right on top like that and not even use the back. Or I can use the back, right? And so right there, it's held nicely on the front and on the back. And the back pieces of these are so thin. I forgot to send the link to Adriana to put it in the blog, but these are so tight magnets. If you want, you can contact me and I can give you the direct link to get a savings on these if you want, but I can also give it to Adriana to put on the blog. So you can do it like this, or you can use the clover head pins as we talked about earlier, right? So you're going to want to make sure that it is well out of the way of where you're stitching. The third option that you can do is when you get to your machine, you can add a basting box. So some machines, they are able to add a basting box right there on the machine. If not, I don't know, Sheila, do you have free basting boxes on your website or basting boxes?
Yeah, I have a set of free basting boxes.
So you can go to Sheila's website and download get her free basting boxes. And that way, that's the first thing you'll do when you can stitch the basting box down and then go and load your design. We talked about, using SF 101 on the back of it to help with pooling as well. So that, helps as well. But if you want to hoop it, you can definitely hoop it. Just make sure that the hoop is much larger and would be outside of the area of the project that you need, so that you don't have this lovely hoop burn like that. So that's how I hoop mine. And also when we talked about the edge-to-edge quilting, and I have a few pictures to show of that if you guys want to see that as well. Does the magnetic hoop work on all embroidery machines? I can't say all of the embroidery machines, Verna, but I used to have a Viking Designer 1, and they didn't make the hoop for that, but that was a very old machine. So most of the machines that are current on the market that are available now, they most have those hoops for most of them, and they come in all the sizes. So it's just, these hoops are amazing, and they're awesome for edge-to-edge quilting. So let me show you. Hang on a second, really quickly, just a PowerPoint on the screen so you can see that. So this is, hang on a second. Did I not share the right thing? Okay, well, it doesn't matter. So this is, you can see the magnetic hoop, and I'm quilting there a blanket that is, I'm doing edge-to-edge quilting. And that's it on the embroidery machine. And so here is the finished item that you can see. So you can see really well all of that beautiful quilting on there. And that is like C3, and there's a bunch of luxe in there. So it's a bunch of different types of Cuddle that I did the edge-to-edge quilting on. And you can see how well it stands out, even on the thicker Cuddle. And then even on the back here, that is super, the back, it looks brown on the left-hand side there. That is super long, like 15 millimeter long fibers, and you can still see the quilting in that. So I just wanted to share with you how, doing Cuddle like that and edge to edge quilting using the magnetic hoop, because that's something that, you don't want to be smashing it down all those layers of the Cuddle into a regular hoop.
That is just gorgeous. Thank you for showing us those samples and for all that work that you did creating that. That's really absolutely stunning. I mean, machine embroidery is like, I never get tired of doing it because there's just so much that you can do. I mean, we've got beautiful fabric to start with, but then, machine embroidery is just a whole nother level. I did see that Mary asked if you use your magnetic hoop, if you put the Cuddle under the hoop, does it still cause hoop burn? And no, it doesn't. So the way a regular embroidery hoop works is it kind of squeezes the fabric together. It's almost like if you've ever smashed your finger in the car door, think about your finger between the door and the car frame. Okay, so catching the stabilizer is a lot like that same process. It's squeezing the stabilizer between two things that are really trying to hold that fiber or the stabilizer in there so that the stabilizer doesn't move around. The job of the stabilizer is to support the stitches so that the embroidery machine can put stitches in the thing you want to stitch. Another thing that the stabilizer does is it supports the fabric. So with Cuddle fabric, since it's a knit, we're trying to control the stretch, right? We don't want the fabric to stretch around while we're stitching on it, because if you've done machine embroidery for a while, you may have already experienced that when if you're stitching on a t-shirt or something that's a really soft jersey knit, if you stretch it in the hoop and then you take it out of the hoop after you've stretched it, all of the stitches are they distorted the fabric, and now you got like a wrinkly, bubbly, lumpy little mess. We need to keep in mind the kind of fabric that it is. So it's a knit fabric and it can stretch. A lot of times we're using that to our advantage, but when we are doing some machine embroidery on it, we've got to control that stretch while we're doing the embroidery. And so we're going to stitch it to the stabilizer with a basting box, or we're going to use a magnetic hoop, or we're going to use some adhesive spray. Another thing we didn't even talk about, but I saw somebody in the comments mention, is you can get stabilizer that's already sticky, and it's called sticky stabilizer. In fact, Dime actually makes a sticky hoop made specifically for using with sticky stabilizer on your flatbed embroidery machines. They make them for multi-needle machines too. They're a frame hoop, a Durkee hoop, or a fast frames. There's several different kinds of them, but they're made for using a sticky stabilizer. And the stabilizer, you don't have to use a spray. It's already sticky. So it's like a big sticker, but it's also strong enough for the stitches to hold into it. And some of those are tear away and some of those are cut away and they stay in forever. So there's all kinds.
There's also sticky wash away.
If there's cutaway, wash away, and tear away are the three basic kinds. But within those stabilizers, there's like hundreds of different kinds of cutaways, washaways, and tearaways. So again, like I said, that's a whole other rabbit hole. We've talked for longer than I expected us to, which I'm not surprised by that. But we've got some other things that we want to do. So let me remind us first that if you have more machine embroidery questions, please join the I Love Cuddle Facebook group. We'd love to keep talking about machine embroidery. You are always free to ask machine embroidery and Cuddle questions over there at any time. You can also keep commenting on the live video after we're done here, and we're in here answering questions. And we'll, I know I've seen Jackie and Lisa both answer so many questions. And so thank you again. Jackie and Lisa are both super knowledgeable about machine embroidery, and they have taught me some things, which is so fun. But if you have tips that we didn't get to, and you'd like to share your tips for getting good machine embroidery results on Cuddle fabric, share those in the I Love Cuddle group. Show us the projects that you have done with machine embroidery and Cuddle fabric. That gets us so excited. And usually you will get lots of affirmations and praises for the work that you've done with your tools that you have at your disposal. So we'd love to see them. And I know I'll be sure to cheer you on too, because it's one of my favorite things. Dawn, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I do, actually. So is it I don't know how to say her name. Tishua? I'm so sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. You said you'll definitely join when you finally get an embroidery machine. I Love Cuddle Fabric group on Facebook is not specific to machine embroidery. It is for all love of Cuddle. It's a whole community of people who love Cuddle. So regular sewing projects are in there. It's not just machine embroidery. So please come and join us in that group, even if you don't have an embroidery machine, because it's not just specific to machine embroidery, it's also sewing. I also wanted to mention, with quilting in the hoop like this, you do not use a stabilizer. So you don't use a stabilizer on the bottom and then your quilt sandwich. You strictly use your quilt sandwich. So what that means is your backing fabric, and then if you have batting in there, I did not use batting in my sample because I had 2 layers of the Cuddle and I didn't need it, but you would start with it would be laid down, so you would have the bottom of the frame, you would have your backing fabric, your batting if you wanted that, and then on top you would have your quilt top, and then the top of the magnetic frame on top of that. So you are strictly only hooping the quilt sandwich itself. So that's how that's done. So and when I do edge to edge quilting, I did not use any topper. That quilt I did, it was more of like just a throw. So it was like 54 by 54, and it ended up being about, I think, 28 hoopings of it, which sounds like, oh my gosh, it's going to take forever. It's so fast because the edge to edge quilting is run stitches, and so it takes longer to open up the hoop, scooch the quilt sandwich over, close the hoop, and get it started. The design I chose, and it wasn't super dense, but it also wasn't super loose, it was like a 3-minute stitch out, and literally that's what it did. And I do not use the water soluble stabilizer on top for edge to edge quilting. Others may use it, but personally I don't.
That's really great. Okay, so we probably we could go on for hours, but everybody else has stuff to do besides talk about embroidery and Cuddle fabric. But we'll keep talking about it on the group, so join us over there. If you've got more questions that we didn't answer, please ask them and we will get you an answer. If we don't know the answer, we know people who know the answers. Again, check out the Shannon Fabrics blog post for the Sew Together Live today. And also, we have prizes to give away. So, Adriana, tell us who our winners are. Dawn, do you want to read those for us?
So the giveaways winners are Amy Profeta, Marcia Frost, and Doris Bivens. So make sure you email info@shannonfabrics.com with your name, your shipping address, complete address, city, state, zip code, street, all of that, and your phone number, so that we need that for the shipping details. And in the subject line, please put live winner. And remember, this video is available to rewatch on the Shannon Fabric YouTube channel as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dawn. Congratulations to our winners. Don't forget to go by the Shannon Fabrics website also and download this machine embroidery on Cuddle tip sheet. So this is a free download on the Shannon Fabrics website. We want you to be successful doing machine embroidery on Cuddle. So we've made this for you. It's chock full of probably more information than we even got a chance to talk about today, but it's there for you. It's free. And congratulations to our winners. And thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. We're excited and we wish you happy sewing as always. And thank you.
Happy National Embroidery Month.
Exactly.
Happy National Embroidery Month. February.
All right. Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dawn. It was so fun to be on here with you as always. And we'll probably chat later a little bit. And anyway, thanks to everybody for being here with us. We're so glad you joined us. We'll see you later. Happy sewing.